Assalamu alaikum. I'm Carl Arrindell and you're watching In Focus. Now, an article ran a fortnight ago with the header, How Zach Goldsmith Imported Donald Trump Politics into Britain. Its author, Peter Oborne, was British Press Awards columnist of the year 2013. He's an associate editor of The Spectator and some months ago resigned as a chief political columnist of the Daily Telegraph. His books include The Triumph of the Political Class, The Rise of Political Living and Why the West is Wrong About Nuclear Iran. He has described Goldsmith's campaign as the most repulsive he has ever seen in his lengthy career as a journalist. I'm pleased to be joined in the studio by Peter Oborne to discuss these important issues. Assalamu alaikum, Peter.
Alaikum salam.
Welcome to In Focus.
Thank you.
Now, I was looking up the official definition of the term dog whistling, or the dog whistle politics, and it's described as the process which has emerged in politics over the past decade and is the art of calling up your supporters and getting them riled up, it must be an American dictionary, using subtly coded language that appeals to their baser instincts. Isn't it fair to say that although we sometimes have an unsavoury result, dog whistling is a well-established part of the political dynamic, both in Britain and internationally?
Well, it might be, but I don't think we've seen something on this scale for some time. In the article I wrote for the Middle East Eye, where I write a column, I made the argument that this was a very sectarian campaign. I'm very proud of being British, and I think the whole thing about being British is that we're tolerant. And what I'm afraid to say, that the Goldsmith campaign, Mr. Goldsmith himself is a nice gentleman, but I'm afraid he's being directed by some rather sinister figures in the Tory High Command. And what he's doing is he's targeting a particular community with his rhetoric, with his language, and with his allies. The Muslim community, and he's with this permanent narrative that's rather blameless, extremely boring, politically correct individual called Sadiq Khan, the candidate to be mayor of London, but wouldn't say boo to a goose, is actually some form of friend or anyway controlled by or associated with all these sinister extremists.
Now, I'm aware that you've never been frightened to take a public stand in respect of principled positions or to defend your deeply held beliefs and opinions, even against the Conservative Party leadership, for which you've been a lifelong member, even especially against the leadership of your own party. Although some may have been a bit surprised listening to you this weekend on the BBC Sunday Politics programme, denouncing the Conservative Party mayoral candidate for his use of dog whistle tactics in the run-up to the mayoral election, especially as you yourself, being a staunch supporter, was it not perhaps going a bit too far to urge voters to, and I quote, vote out Zach Goldsmith and his disgusting campaign, while announcing your own intention to vote for the Labour Party's candidate and to implicitly suggest that all Londoners follow suit?
Well, it wasn't implicitly. I was hoping, I was for what it's worth, giving my own advice to vote for Sadiq Khan. I've never actually been a member of the Conservative Party, by the way, but I've tended to vote Conservative. And as I say, I do think that being Conservative is about being decent and tolerant, and this sort of invidious targeting of the Labour candidate to be mayor, Sadiq Khan, on the basis that he is a Muslim, is exactly the opposite of that. I mean, I think there's a big general point to be made here. Here is Sadiq Khan. He's a very successful lawyer. He voted for same-sex marriage, driving many in the Muslim community completely bonkers. And by the way, many in the Anglican community, and all kinds of communities are against that, religious ones. He's spent his life attacking anti-Semitism, attacking extremism, or whatever that means. And if somebody like Sadiq Khan is deemed by the Conservatives to be unfit for office because of his extreme affiliations, can we ask a very serious question? Is there any Muslim in this great country of ours who would be deemed to be fit? for
Yeah, but
office.
you've raised a number of key important issues, and I think you're not alone. Baroness Farsi, the Conservative peer,
made that point.
just a few days ago, asked the very same question. You've talked about, as one newspaper summed up, with the question of how we can. I think one paper said, "Are we really going to hand the world's greatest city to a Labour Party that thinks terrorists are its friends?" Is this sort of politics, guilt by association, an acceptable line in today's field?
I'm afraid not. I mean, I think that it's been going on too. We've seen the continued remarks of this nature by Mr. Goldsmith and the Conservative leadership. And I'm afraid that is that phrase you use, dog whistle stuff, that the idea that London wouldn't be safe in the hands of Mr. Sadiq Khan is outrageous. It really upsets me, this cheap use of security. Security is a really serious thing. You know, bombs go off, people are shot, people are killed, and then to use it as a partisan political tool, which is what the Conservatives have quite disgracefully been doing, is very upsetting.
But we saw this when Jeremy Corbyn was elected. There was a consistent use of this issue of safety. Now we were all now vulnerable. Is that part of the same?
Yeah, well, with the case of Mr. Corbyn, it was in many ways particularly annoying because Mr. Corbyn's got a very good record on foreign policy. He was against the Iraq invasion, which not only led to the kind of disaster which is struck the Middle East in so much of it, but also led to the rise of Al-Qaeda, which was almost defeated at that point. He was against the Libyan intervention. He's got extraordinarily sound. Well, I mean, anyway, he's been proved right again and again in his foreign policy judgments. And these people, these conservative neoconservatives who say that he's a threat to our nation's safety, ought to look at their own record. They really should.
Now, many political pundits believe that he is. I'm talking about Zach Goldsmith in his campaign.
Goldsmith, yes.
That he's locked into the Conservative Party machine's latest strategy of denouncing the opposition by stirring up these unwarranted anxieties and fears, and as I said in the introduction, appealing to the basic instincts of the electorate in order to attack opponents. During the Prime Minister's questions last month, the Prime Minister, David Cameron, said that the Labour mayoral candidate, Sadiq Khan, had appeared again and again and again alongside South London Imam Suleiman Ghani, who he suggested was a supporter of the Islamic State. The current Conservative Mayor, Boris Johnson, who I know is an old friend and Spectator colleague of yours, has bluntly attempted to encourage this smear by saying, for example, that there is, and I quote him, an ideological continuum between the views of Ken Livingstone about Israel and the position of Jeremy Corbyn, and indeed the views of their candidate for Mayor Sadiq Khan, referring to Khan's condemnation of Livingstone as just being politically expedient. Even Michael Fallon, the Defence Secretary, invoked national security saying that it was risky to appoint Khan as mayor. Is it simply the case that the Tory spin doctors are administering the dark arts of their own Darth Vader, Sir Linton Crosby?
Yeah, well, also this is the reason, the fundamental reason I feel very seriously that this is a terrible campaign by the Conservatives. Just let's take the example of Suleiman Ghani, if we can, who is an imam in Tooting and was denounced, and he's appeared on platforms, according to the Conservatives, with Sadiq Khan. Now, the Prime Minister said he supports ISIS at Prime Minister's questions. That's a very serious allegation. I mean, last week somebody was sent to jail for supporting ISIS.
Precisely.
And I heard what the Prime Minister said, and I rang up Downing Street, the press office, and said, you know, what is the evidence for this extremely serious allegation? They refused to answer the question, the press office. They said, this is not a question for us. You need to talk to the political staff. So it's a political matter whether or not it supports ISIS, apparently. Are they saying, therefore, that the Prime Minister made this allegation for political reasons, that they made this dark suggestion, a terrible attack on an individual, that he supports ISIS for some political reason in order to support the candidate of Zach Goldsmith. Anyway, I went and saw Mr. Ghani, or actually he came to me. I got in touch with him, and he very kindly came and saw me, had a long meeting. We went through his beliefs, and and he's a wonderful man. He's a sort of nice, gentle fellow. He brought me all kinds of documents about how he collaborated, did stuff with the local synagogue, the local churches. You know, he clearly is not. I mean, he's campaigned against ISIS. And I bottomed it out. There is no truth in the Prime Minister's remarks about Mr. Ghani. And I say this in all seriousness to the Prime Minister. I've written to Downing Street about this. You must now withdraw these terrible claims that you have made, Mr. Cameron, Mr. Prime Minister, against an innocent imam doing good work in South London. You cannot allow this terrible smear to remain on the record. I have now written a letter in the columns of Middle East Eye to Downing Street, asking them to take down that smear, to apologise to Mr. Ghani, because as things stand, do you know what the Tories have done? This is one way. It looks very much as if in order, as part of their campaign to promote Zach Goldsmith and to damage Sadiq Khan, the British Prime Minister of the day has falsely accused Mr. Salman Ghani, a Tooting imam, of being an IS supporter. I just cannot think of anything more squalid or shameful or disgusting or base in terms of political behaviour.
Very profound statements and very substantial statements. You are seeking a public, I take it, apology. You recognise, of course, that David Cameron made those statements under the protection of privilege in Parliament.
Yeah.
I think Salman Ghani made the comment to the press afterwards that if he dares to repeat those outside, he'll sue him.
Well, I think it's absolutely repellent that the Prime Minister of this country should take resort in parliamentary privilege in order to launch this, as far as I can tell, completely baseless attack on a British citizen in order to obtain political advantage. I just cannot understand what's going on here. And I do say Mr. Cameron must either completely substantiate this assertion, which I'm quite certain he would be unable to do, having gone to see Mr. Ghani and read his statements, and or withdraw it. And it's just simply the decent and right thing to do.
But I think, as what we've alluded to in this conversation, is that there seems to be a pattern. It's not just David Cameron happening by coincidence to be making a statement to Lord Boris Johnson or the Defence Secretary. There's a strategy, and I put it to you earlier that Sir Linton Crosby, the master of dark arts at the Conservative Party, credited with having won the election for David Cameron last time, may have unveiled this strategy. Do you also suggest to our Prime Minister that this needs to come to an end?
Well, I don't know the details of how the campaign who's been running the campaign. I understand Sir Linton Crosby, indeed, says that he hasn't been. But I don't know, right? I'm not going to go down there. But I certainly think we need to know who provided Downing Street, the British Prime Minister, with this information about Salman Ghani, and what action is being taken against that person. And indeed, is there a strategy here in the Conservative Party?
Talking about this issue of strategy, I remember when we last met in the studio, we discussed the issue of the tactics and the language used in the case of the Tower Hamlets mayoral campaign, and when Judge Richard Morey QC, summing up, seemed to follow the line of 19th century English elite in attacking, at the time it was the integrity of the Irish peasants, but this time it was the integrity of the Bangladeshis from East London. In justifying the removal of the Tower Hamlets mayor, he was accused of using religious pressure and influence. Spiritual influence is the word. Now, you said at the time, from what you could understand, that Lutfur Rahman's buttering up of his core supporters was just simply following a long-held British tradition. And can it be argued that this dog whistle campaign is an affront to our democratic values? Or are we adopting, as I think you've also said, a soft form of apartheid towards Muslims in Britain?
Well, I'm not an expert on what happened in Tower Hamlets. I haven't reported directly on it. But I think I've forgotten those remarks, but I think what I probably meant is that graft and corruption, which is roughly what Lutfur Rahman was accused of, happens quite a lot in local elections and in constituency elections, very much associated with the Labour Party in Scotland, for example, and in some of the northern boroughs. And just to focus on one, I don't want to make any judgment on what Mr. Rahman did or didn't do, by the way. I simply do not know. But a bit of